This is day 5 of the June 90 7-day retreat at Springwater. This morning I would like to talk about something which has come up very frequently in this retreat with different people. It has come up before, too. And it is also something that one reads about quite a bit these days in publications, some of the publications of some of the spiritual training centers. I will try to put it the way one person here said it, not able to repeat verbatim what was said. I've lived in a spiritual community for many years. Eventually I left it and only realized then, or began to realize then, that there were hosts of psychological problems I'd never come in touch with, never dealt with, and am now facing, wondering how to deal with them, or have faced when I left the community. This topic comes up, as I just mentioned, quite a bit in some of the publications from spiritual centers. What seems to be a new interest in psychotherapy for people pursuing a spiritual practice. And quite often a very generous recommendation to pursue psychotherapy, because meditation may or does not take care of psychological problems. How shall we go about looking at this? And is the same thing happening here? Where we get together to look into ourselves, be with what is coming up. Is the same thing happening? Not getting in touch with what we call psychological problems. What do we call psychological problems? What other problems do we have? We have technical problems, medical problems, is all the rest psychological problems? Problems of relationship, problems of fear, anxiety, panic, anger, jealousy, greed. Are these psychological problems? I think they are. This is opening up discussion for meetings. As I said yesterday, I can't think of everything, obviously, and also for the sake of simplicity, not to get too complex. If psychological problems, which some of them we have just listed, if they don't come up, why don't they come up? In a place where one says or feels one is meditating. And we would also have to look right away at what we call meditating, wouldn't we? What is meditation? That is opening a tremendous thing. I hadn't thought that question would come up. But here it is. What is meditation? Are there as many answers to this question as there are schools of meditation? There are, if meditation refers to a particular way of using the mind, of training the mind. Training the mind as means to an end. Training meaning providing practices, concentration practices like counting, breathing, inhalation, exhalation, or following the breathing. Labeling whatever goes through the mind, whatever it is sensed, giving it a label or describing it in a sentence. Working on koans. Most people here many people have been to Zen centers, so may know what koan is. Koan, for the sake of people who don't, trying to resolve an impossible problem posed to the mind. Or just being with one word, trying to figure out what that word means, or what the meaning of what this word may point to is, and the mind focusing on this word, or on this problem. Usually in the beginning, very brief, one word, 2 words, a brief sentence. Another practice is questioning, who am I? Or just who? Persistently connecting it with the breathing, questioning who on the inhalation or the exhalation, usually the exhalation. And then there are practices I am not at all familiar with, a Tibetan school. One person who had studied there for 9 years said there are 100,000 practices. To train the mind. To what? What is the end that the means are for? To quiet down? To empty itself? These are ends given the emptying of the mind, the quieting of it, the quieting of thought or the control of thought, the eventually coming to enlightenment, a state of liberation, deliverance from suffering, from the state of self-centeredness. Other aspects of meditation training are posture, how to sit, often very specific instructions given, and one learns to heed those because they are the means to an end. Is that what meditation is? The practicing in a certain way to hold the mind, to come to a desired state? Am I loading the question? I don't mean to. I really want to look at it. Because we were asking, why do psychological problems not come up? As people tell me, many people tell me, and as is written by meditation teachers of various meditation centers, recommending that people who have personal psychological problems do therapy, because meditation may or does not take care of those problems. And then we were asking whether this is so here. Do problems not come up? And the immediate question suggests itself, doesn't it? If they don't come up, why don't they come up? Because we're full of them. All of us. Full of all kinds of psychological problems. Not everybody having every one of them, but as a group, we probably manifest quite a good average. I'm not saying that they don't come up, because we've already had talks about it, but we're inquiring freshly from scratch right now. Do they come up? If they don't, why not? And if they do, what is the response of the meditator? I hesitate to say this, because does one see oneself sitting down here as a meditator? That could be inquired into immediately. A new image or an old image that one is attached to sitting down as a meditator. Because the moment we sit down as somebody, something is blocked out. Maybe a lot. So, if, as people report, and as journals and talks by well-known, well-experienced meditation teachers say psychological problems may not come up, why don't they? Is it that here in a setting of a beautiful, beautiful environment, flowering meadows, fragrant air, varieties of songbirds and little drummers in the middle of the hills, mountains, lovely colors, the air, the temperature. There hasn't been a weather problem, has there? So in this atmosphere, is that what keeps psychological problems in abeyance? Having nothing to do except 1 or maybe 2 hours of work a day, and that's pretty much delineated. It doesn't have, except for some of the supervisors, they have to keep thinking, is there going to be enough peaches for tomorrow? Or cherries? Apart from a few people who have to plan some or take care of some logistic problems, most of us don't. Which is very unusual for this day and age, to live for a week without pressure of shopping, cooking, working, relating with people, at home in the family, at the workplace, with people one works for or with people who work for one. All of those potential problem sources removed. Not needing to talk with each other. And therefore, not needing to get hurt by each other or hurting someone, which usually happens with talk. All of that removed, does that remove the psychological problems? To a degree. To a degree that is so, isn't it? Another reason why psychological problems may not come up, and I'm not saying this is so for everybody, because it isn't, but we're questioning it right now. Another reason why it may not come up is that one does have something to do with the mind to keep problems which one has learned to consider outside the purview of meditation at bay. The mind, the brain and body have learned to suppress, to control. To keep in abeyance through concentrating on a meditation practice. And this is what people report to me. They discover that this is what is going on. And sometimes in the subtlest of ways, which one has not surmised we're still operating. Maybe one has left the practice 9 or 10 years ago, and there still may be the drone of moo in the belly. And if one looks closely, operating with some kind of willpower to keep maybe a quiet state coming or alive, to keep it coming or to keep it, to get it, or if it's there, to keep it. So one cannot say out of hand, I'm not doing this anymore. I've left that. Because conditioning in this organism runs very deep. Not just superficial thought, but the whole organism gets conditioned through thought and practice. To control, to suppress, to brace against, to ignore, to deny. And before one started a meditation practice, the body was already doing things like this. It had experience in that since earliest of days, to control, suppress, shut off or down whatever became too unbearable to feel, to be in touch with. Pain, humiliation, anger, anxiety. This is what our psychological problems are, not being in touch with them. Not being in touch with what was just listed, anger or anxiety. Feelings of humiliation, insufficiency, jealousy, envy. And very often, the spiritual practice has supported and reinforced this already existing mechanism of suppression and denial, avoidance. I'm not trying to put forth a dogma. This is for each one of us to look at, examine, test out, question, without immediately having the answer to it. As I said, often one hasn't realized for a long time that something is operating until one comes upon it. And usually when there is some quietness inside and out, some silence, and therefore habitual mechanisms come quite starkly into view when they start operating. Because dreams come up, people tell me about dreams they have, which reveal what the conscious mind is totally unaware of. So, first of all, do I feel that psychological problems have no place in meditation? It's absurd. The words don't even come out. It's so absurd to me to feel that way. Why make any division? Why have any idea of what should come up and what shouldn't? What belongs here and what doesn't? One person this morning mentioned, I've got so many distractions. And my first question was, could you start, as per right now, to abstain from labeling anything a distraction? Distraction comes from wanting to concentrate on something. And with wanting to concentrate on something, which may be the quiet mind, the mind creates distractions. Because anything that is outside of what is concentrated upon becomes a distraction. That's not only simple logic, it operates that way. And with that immediately arises conflict, the exertion of willpower, effort, and the drain of energy in these undertakings. Feeling guilt about being no good, getting no place. Being without virtue. All of this stuff coming when one wants to do this and everything else is outside of it and therefore undesirable, to be avoided. So, as far as I'm concerned, There's nothing that does not belong into. Oh, everything is there. Who is to judge what belongs and doesn't belong into meditative practice? Meditation is the open listening and looking to whatever is there as it is this instant, which is incredibly hard and difficult because the mind already knows what it is. And because it already knows what it is, it reacts with control or repression, anger, conflict, or elation. If what seems to come up is a blissful state, one would never regard that as a distraction, which it can become very quickly if one looks at it that way, because then there comes the holding on to it, the wanting it to continue, and not giving attention to the very holding on to something, which is also taking place beside the blissful, peaceful feelings that are felt throughout the body. A thought, let's keep that. How can I continue with that? That's part of what's going on this moment. Can it come into awareness? And it does. Many people have told me how at the moment there is such a state of no conflict, no division, so quickly the thought, oh boy, either I've got it, or how can I keep it? I must hang on to this, and then noticing that it's gone. What's left is thoughts and physical, strained sensations to keep or get something. And then the sadness, pain at the thought of having lost. We talk to ourselves about what's going on with us a lot, most of the time. We have storylines going on about ourselves, our state, our progress, the opposite of progress. And to that we react. Can that all be in the realm of meditative awareness, meditative looking and listening, so that nothing is excluded? The whole thing is there. No one with the burden of judging that this is distracting or helpful. Let it all just be what it is. What is it? If we have no judgment. So, someone may say, I heard what you said, and it made a lot of sense, but the psychological problems that I meet up with once I leave this retreat and go back home onto work just don't come up here. It's true. It's a different thing here. We've listed many of the differences which are more conducive to quiet and less conducive to problem causing. And yet one may deceive oneself that there are no problems. What comes to mind, I mentioned it to one or two people already, so excuse me for repeating it. In the last retreat, there was a man who, it was not the first time he came to retreat, it was second or third time, very steeped in Zen, without calling himself a Zen Buddhist, but very attracted, particularly to the literature of Zen, the art. And we've had very little rapport before. I sort of had the feeling he was just enduring what used to be called my psychologizing, talking about mundane problems. Actually, in the first meeting he asked me, has nothing in these last 10 years happened to you? Because I was talking in the first talk about saying the same thing over and over again. Because it's so important. We were talking about authority. And his first question was, why do you talk about the same thing over and over again? Has nothing, no experiences happened to you? Reading the masters, he said, one reads about masters going through deepening experiences. Why do you never talk about that? Or has it happened to you? And then later on in a meeting, he said something like this, with quite a bit of energy and elation. I used to think that I was sitting in emptiness. And I'm beginning to see all the movements that go on in this mind and body. And I've noticed that practically at all the time, whether I'm sitting here, whether I'm walking, or whether I'm chopping vegetables in the kitchen, I want people to admire me. I have this strange desire for people to look at me and admire me for what I'm doing. He was amazed that I don't know what the amazement was, at finding out something that's going on, at seeing the truth of something that's happening. And that this created emptiness was an illusion. It was created by control, which thought is able to do, practice is able to do. And the freedom all of a sudden of this person who had never said anything about himself, had a very dignified manner. The freedom to talk about something like wanting to be interesting to other people. It was not a confessional. It was just something that had been discovered. So, one need never assume anything about anything. That there are no problems, or that they don't come up here, they'll come up later. When the mind begins to open up to what's there, with great vulnerability, meaning willing to feel pain if something painful comes up, to be with anxiety if that disturbance arises, panic, as some people say, overcome by panic at a thought. If there's the willingness, the readiness, all of the words don't quite describe it, it's openness to be with what is there, then very similar things surface in our daily moment-to-moment living, albeit in an atmosphere of quietness around us. And maybe also some quietness inside. The quietness to look and listen freshly. to be taken by surprise, to be astonished, not immediately moo or hoo it away. And not to cling to the idea that one is whatever one thinks one is. What does one think one is? I remember from the Zen tradition that one is quite frequently told that one is a budding Buddha. I don't know whether those words were used, but one is essentially a Buddha as one sits here. One sitting in the right posture is already manifesting Buddha nature. Has a tremendously powerful thought to give inspiration, and the juices which are inspiration, they are internal outpourings of stuff. I don't know what it all is. Somebody in a newspaper, in a magazine, wrote that there are 30,000 chemicals operating in us, at least. So some of them respond to an inspiring thought and make the body feel inspired, produce energy. And with that energy, a fear that may have come up or an anxiety is drowned out, controlled or held in abeyance. Several people in this retreat have reported a almost tenacious holding on to a posture even when there was a sick feeling over pain. And only upon discussing it and talking about such a thing as a chair and trying it out, does one come to realize that one does not have to suffer sitting pains. We have enough to suffer. If the mind is open to allow it to come in and not banish it through posture pain or idea inspiration or practice mechanism. Is sitting and being in touch in the midst of pain, anxiety, or whatever, is that enough, people ask? Do I have to do psychotherapy on the side or in addition? Why ask me? I'm not an authority on that or on anything. I'm just talk. Many people have told me deriving great benefits from psychotherapy, particularly after leaving a spiritual center. Coming in touch with stuff that one was repressing as one had repressed it before. Feeling a new openness, a new in-touchness. Why divide anything up? If in what is called psychotherapy one comes in touch with things and can see what's going on, well, that's what needs to be done. So things don't remain underground and festering and doing their subterraneous mischief. Whatever helps to come in touch with things. We don't go to retreat very often. Sometimes the reason not more comes up in retreat or talk or meeting is that there's so little of it. I know with psychoanalysis, Some people go 5 times a week for 1 hour. That's a lot of time to spend. For years, sometimes for 10 years. So, can one give great patience to this whole matter of finding out about oneself? Not expect instant results. Like a person came to I think I've mentioned it someplace, a retreat in California. He told me he had been to 20 instant enlightenment weekends. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm given to exaggeration, but I'm not exaggerating. My first question was, why do you come here? He walked with tremendous energy and self-assurance, but at one point in the retreat, broke down, sobbing, crying. Genuinely, not a show of it. So if I go to therapy, I also want to know what's happening. I want to know what's happening all the time. To find out, I'm curious. Actually, I remember many years ago meeting my husband in Switzerland. I was in the late 40s. He'd gone over there to study, but also to do a psychoanalysis. He had become interested in that, because he had become aware of some problems with his job that he was training for, and dissatisfaction with chemistry and stuff. And it just felt this was a marvelous opportunity, having a scholarship to go to Europe to find a good analyst to work with. And he found one. It was a man who was working quite independently. He was a Freudian analyst, but he was working quite independently from the Freudian scheme. And at one point, Kyle sort of almost talked me into going there too. I thought I didn't need that stuff. But it was alluring to find out something about myself. I'd been interested in it. I've thought about that before. Questions were very alive for me. So I did go. That lasted for a year. Then we came to this country. It was an older man, tall, very attractive in my eyes. Sort of a father figure. And he was also well known. He had published books, which I knew. He was an important man and good looking. And I'm not telling it to be funny. I'm trying to be as straightforward and honest as my memory permits me. So he sat behind me. I laid on the couch. I was in my early 20s then. The relationship was professionally absolutely correct and appropriate. But I had the feeling there was something going on between us. For one thing, I was intensely interested in his interest in me. That did whole bunches of good to me, to have this interesting, good-looking man sitting behind me interested in me. And with that, I became that much more interested in myself. There was a great stimulation in that, to produce interesting things for him to be interested in. I know what this is called transference. I'm not trying to make fun of it. And this is what I'm wondering about, all of this working on oneself. Here or in therapy, analysis, gestalt, whatever, astrology. What is it doing to one, to this continuous storyline of me, to which I am tremendously attached? I am, we are, I'm not just talking personally. Is whatever work one is doing in finding out about oneself doing a great deal to feed this storyline about me? Apart from what it reveals and relief from symptoms, and at the same time, more attachment to the story of my life, me, interesting to another. Because analysis eventually comes to an end, although I know one person who has been in analysis for 25 years. And can one question, apart from finding out about our problems and seeing into them, maybe the relief of bothersome symptoms, lifting of depression, compulsion or obsession, if indeed happens, and it happens, people tell me, to some extent. They feel much better, much freer and capable of working than they did before, and of relating. But what about this story of me and my life? Is one interested in that? Not to add to it, to revel in it, get inspiration from it or depressed by it, but to question the whole thing. Whether this is necessary for our survival as a healthy, loving, intelligent human being. Or whether it may indeed pose a hindrance very often, particularly if not seen, if not understood, in its addictive effects. So, we're interested to come upon. We're not saying it's a distraction. We're not saying it's for therapy. We want to find out about anxiety and meet it. We've talked about it already, haven't we? Can there be such unconditional witness? Not even I with that, because that's an illusion. Just that. Not going to sleep over it in order to forget all about it, but aware and awake with the pain, the anger, the sorrow, sadness. Not saying that belongs into therapy. Questioning it, and also questioning who it is that has all of that, that feels as though he or she had that or endured that, suffered from it. and clings. We cling not just to our joys, we also cling to our sorrows. Sounds absurd, but it is a fact. Tremendous clinging to our sorrow, to our life as a sufferer, as a victim, a martyr. So, how deeply can we go with the questioning, with the wondering, with the listening, in quietness and silence? We will end here for today.